Assalamualaikum everyone. My name is Dr. Tanzil and welcome to another lesson of Level 2 Narrative Reviews. Today we shall be discussing about how to do a literature search when we are writing a narrative review. So anyone having interest in research will have to develop some habit of reading research articles, research papers to have an insight of what's coming new and where there's a gap to actually fill in and step up for that purpose. So literature search, as we talk about, effective literature search is essential to identifying selection bias. Now, selection bias simply basically means to ease the researcher for example, I'm doing a research on, let's say, azithromycin and COVID-19, and I'm comparing something about those things. So a selection bias can be introduced if I take a population from the United States or the North America only, and I do not take the data that is from, let's say, Far East Asia or from Southeast Asia or from other parts of the world. So there's a selection bias, and the results that I will get will not be generalized to the global population. So if the review query is well defined, it is easy to develop an effective search strategy in a search engine friendly format. So it is in a narrative review, as you know, that we do not have a well-defined structure of what we want to discuss. It's basically different roadmaps leading to different directions, and it's a broad scope of discussion. But if you have that, even in that broad scope of discussion, you have your research questions well defined, you'll be more focused on what type of literature research you are actually looking for. A method similar to that employed for systematic reviews is recommended in literature search for the narrative reviews as well, and for that I would recommend that you check the systematic review lesson, and that would give you more insight of how the research is actually going to be conducted, the literature search, by that I mean. And here I would like to also point a short distinction between the systematic review literature search, because for a narrative review you need at least 20 to 25 research articles to make sure that you have a credible review at the end. But for a systematic review, because it follows the PRISMA guidelines and all of that thing, you only need about 5 or 6, and that would do as well for you to publish a good systematic review. Comprehensively created keywords are essential for selection of only relevant articles. Now, creating keywords is essential, and we will be talking subsequently in future slides as well of how you can make your search very effective by using certain keywords and how you will get those keywords. So you need the keywords to make your search relevant, because let's say you are take the previous example of azithromycin and COVID-19. I'm doing a research and I use a keyword, let's say COVID-19, but COVID-19 has multiple synonyms like coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2. So you need to have a wide range of keywords that are synonymous as well. So we'll talk about it in a little slide of what I mean by that. And you need to also look at something here. I would like to point out that when you read abstract, while you're doing literature search, there's a subheading called keywords, and in that heading you will find certain keywords that are relevant to that research paper, and then you can use those keywords in turn to get more articles. So you have to intensify, and to get rich literature search you can use these tactics. So moving on, while you check the eligibility of the article and to make sure that you want to include that in your publication or not. So a quick check is to look at the number of citations that article has, the paper has. And if you see that the number of citations is large, and that article that simply means that it's more credible that you include it in your narrative review. It's going to add more weightage to your research and to make it more credible, more authentic, and there will be higher chances of making it published in a reputable or high impact factor journal. Thesaurus systems such as the National Library of Medicine's MASH terms can be used for selection of keywords directly connected to the topic of your interest. So the National Library of Medicine, that's basically PubMed, and it uses MASH terms. Now, what are MASH terms? Now, this is important, and it's not very difficult to understand. When you go to PubMed, and there's a section called MASH, and if you go there, you'll be actually searching for relevant key terms. So MASH basically simply is medical subject headings. It's an abbreviation for that. It's basically synonyms that are used in literature for that particular word, and certain topics are covered under that heading. Now, for example, you are searching on hypertension. For example, hypertension can go by various names like essential hypertension, chronic hypertension, preeclampsia, gestational hypertension, and so on and so forth, high blood pressure. So you need to search on MASH, and MASH will give you all the relevant articles that includes that term and the keywords that are relevant to that. So it's a little easier method to comprehensively search a good amount of papers. Moving on, selection criteria for the literature search. Now you need to define the inclusion and exclusion criteria for literature selection. Helps in concentrating the research article relevant to the issue. Now, as I discussed previously as well, that narrative review basically is not well-defined structure. You have a little gray area between your question marks. So inclusion and exclusion criteria will not be very well defined. It's not the criteria, but for your own ease and for you to follow a certain roadmap to lead you to a perfect structured, not structured, but basically the amount of reviewing articles that you want to publish. So a little inclusion and exclusion criteria should be defined for your own ease. So this is something that is preferred that you should do. Then it is useful to indicate the date, keywords, and their combination with the number of entries retrieved for each search in the first phase. Now, for the first phase, you are just recruiting as many articles as you can from different search engines. We'll talk about it in a bit, what I mean by that. But then later on, you will be shortlisting all of these. Now, date. Date is important. Why? Now, let's say I'm doing a research about bypass surgery for heart patients, and I'm linking it to minimally invasive surgeries and also incorporating some sort of angioplasty and other sorts of procedure that goes in that particular field. Now, if I take a paper of 50 years old, and that has a lot of citations as well, because at that time it was relevant, but in today's era, that article might not be as relevant for your review in today's day as it was back 50 years ago. So you need to make sure that you select the relevant literature article, the review articles. And keywords, we have already discussed about it in detail. I'm not going too much about that here. The procedure may continue by manually selecting other journals that are cited in the articles found in the initial search. Now, let's say I am looking up at an article that is talking about using azithromycin in patients who have been infected with COVID-19, and I go to the reference of that section of that article, and I found another article that is relevant for my review, so I use that as well. Okay, so this is how you enhance and you intensify for a review that contains all the articles for that particular questionnaire or for that particular topic that you're talking about. The procedure can then be continued until a saturation point is reached. Now, saturation point, as the name suggests, is when something that cannot be gone beyond that point. So saturation point is very subjective. I wouldn't say that it's 50 articles or 100 articles or 20 articles. It depends on the topic you are doing your review upon. So if it's a relatively new topic, then you might not have a lot of literature search on that. So you will have less number of articles or original studies to read. And if you have a relatively broader topic, like I was talking about azithromycin, COVID-19, there's a lot of research published there. So you might have quite a few number of articles that you will have to go through. All right, so moving on, we will discuss about how we will be shortlisting from a pool of 1,000 or more articles. Now, these are the three databases. I search any topic, and let's say I use PubMed, Embase, and Google Scholar, and I get a certain amount of relevant articles using certain keywords. Now, I save all of those articles, and the next step that I follow is I remove the duplicates. Now, it is not necessary that when you are actually using a keyword to search an article on PubMed, it does not necessarily mean that you will not find it on Google Scholar. You might find it on Embase as well. So you need to rule out or delete all the duplicates, and that decreases your number of articles. And then the second step is to get the full text publications for the potential inclusion. So that is going to further on remove the other articles or other research papers that were not full text, or that were just sort of maybe review letter to the editors and stuff like that. So you will just remove those. Then, like I talked about in the previous slide, additional references identified by a manual research Now, by manual research, I mean that you read an article and then you go into the reference section, the reference list from the retrieved articles, and then you pick up that article and you include that as well. So for this particular diagram, schematic diagram flowchart, it had 4 of such, and so that made our sample of 70 articles as finally selected. And lastly, we will use our exclusion criteria. Now, exclusion criteria I talked about, it does not have to be very descriptive, very well defined, but you should have at least have certain points that you will not include this article if it does not meet this criteria. That could be the methodology was not well defined. Okay, that is very important. The importance of that journal was not a very high impact factor journal. It was a journal that does not have a good repute in the community. The number of references that had, and if the content is redundant, it's not useful. Like I talked about, if the research is 50 years old, that topic might not be relevant despite being a search from your keyword. And then finally, you have about 23 articles, and I talked about you need about 20 to 25 for a good narrative review. So you have 23 for this one, and you can go through them, you can divide them with your team, and then jot down all the points and frame it up with that as a matter of fact. Now, when we talk about certain combining search terms, I talk about and, or, and not. So for and, when I talk, these are actually called the Boolean operators. So for and, talk about azithromycin and COVID-19 again. Now, let's say A is azithromycin, B is COVID-19. Now, when you add the word and while you are searching, you will get only those articles that have both the researchers. Now, you will get papers that talk about azithromycin and COVID-19. When I talk about or, that means that you will have papers that have azithromycin, that have COVID-19, and or they have both. So there could be papers that do not talk about COVID-19, they only talk about azithromycin, that would also be included, and vice versa. So that is or. And not a certain important Boolean operator as well, which we do not usually commonly use, but it's also significant. Now, not basically is a keyword that is inserted after that. Now, what I mean by that is if I write azithromycin but COVID-19, that means that you will only get articles that are on azithromycin. You will not get articles on COVID-19. So azithromycin, not COVID-19 means that. So you are actually eliminating all the articles that have COVID-19, whether they include azithromycin or whether they do not include azithromycin, right? So you will only get the ones without COVID. And this comes to the end of our presentation. Thank you for being a good audience and listening. If you have any queries, feel free to reach out to us and we'll be happy to help.